The envelope felt heavier than it really was as I held it in my hands. My palms were sweaty, and my heart beat so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I had been waiting weeks for this DNA test result to arrive, but now that it was here, I was almost too scared to open it. The paper inside seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the seal as if it were a locked door to another world. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind, each one scarier than the last. What if the results showed something I didn't want to know? What if my whole life wasn't what I thought it was? I bit my lip, trying to gather the courage to tear it open. I had no idea that this single piece of paper would change my life forever. It all started as a joke between friends one Friday evening. We had been talking about those DNA kits that people use to trace their roots or find long-lost relatives. My best friend laughed and said, "Come on, try it. Who knows? Maybe you're secretly royalty." At first, I rolled my eyes because I didn't think it was serious. But something about the idea stayed in my mind. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I wanted to know more about my family history, or maybe I was simply bored. I told myself there was nothing to lose. After all, my life was ordinary and predictable. I ordered the kit online, not knowing that the decision would open the darkest and brightest chapter of my life at the same time. When I finally opened the envelope, my eyes froze on the words printed in bold. My father, the man who had raised me, taught me to ride a bike, and wiped my tears when I was little, was not biologically related to me. I blinked several times, thinking maybe I had read it wrong. But the truth stared back at me, cold and unchanging. My chest tightened, and I felt like the room was spinning. Could it be a mistake? I whispered to myself, shaking my head. Memories of my childhood flashed in my mind, and suddenly every smile, every hug, every word from him felt like a question mark. I dropped the paper to the floor and covered my face with my hands. The world I knew, the world I trusted, had just crumbled in a second. The days that followed were filled with silence and confusion. I could barely sleep at night, and when I did, I dreamt of my father's face fading into shadows. My appetite disappeared, and my thoughts circled endlessly around the question, should I confront my mother? Every time I looked at her, I searched for clues in her eyes. Did she know? Had she hidden this from me all these years? I wanted answers, but I was also afraid of what those answers might be. I tried convincing myself it wasn't worth opening old wounds. But the ache in my heart grew heavier, and the silence became unbearable. I realized that not asking was eating me alive. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My mother was sitting at the dining table, sipping her tea quietly, when I walked in with the envelope in my hand. My voice shook as I said, "Mom, we need to talk." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, as if she already knew what was coming. I placed the paper in front of her, and she stared at it for a long time before a tear rolled down her cheek. The silence between us was thick, painful, and almost suffocating. Finally, she whispered, "I was hoping this day would never come." My heart pounded, and I sat across from her, waiting for words that could either break me or set me free. She told me her story with trembling hands and a broken voice. Years ago, before I was born, her life was complicated. She had made choices out of fear, love, and desperation. The man I grew up calling father had known from the beginning that I wasn't his biological child. Yet, he chose me, loved me, and protected me as if I were his own blood. As she spoke, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Part of me was angry for being kept in the dark, but another part of me felt a strange respect for the man who raised me. My mother wept as she begged for my forgiveness. My chest ached with too many emotions to count. After days of silence and reflection, curiosity began to take over my fear. I wanted to know where I truly came from. With shaky hands, I logged back into the DNA database and started digging deeper. Hours turned into days as I searched for matches. Then, one morning, I saw it, a name, a face, and a note that said, possible half-sibling. My breath caught in my throat. Could it be real? I stared at the screen, unsure whether to cry, smile, or close the laptop and pretend I had never seen it. But something inside me told me I had to know more. Reaching out was the hardest part. I typed a message at least 10 times, deleting and rewriting it because I didn't know how to start. Finally, I sent a simple one, "Hi, I think we might be related." The reply came hours later, and my heart raced as I opened it. The words were cautious but open, "Yes, I think so too. I've been waiting for someone like you to show up." The next few days were filled with messages back and forth. We asked questions, shared bits of our lives, and filled in missing pieces like a puzzle. The connection was fragile but real. For the first time, I didn't feel so alone in the secret anymore. The day of the meeting arrived, and I was both excited and terrified. I stood outside the cafe, rehearsing what I would say, but my mind went blank when I saw them walking toward me. The resemblance was undeniable. We had the same eyes, the same awkward smile, and even the same way of tilting our heads. We hugged, and it felt both strange and natural at the same time. We sat down and talked for hours, sharing stories of our childhoods, our struggles, and our dreams. Every word felt like a piece of myself I had been missing all my life. By the time the sun set, I knew I had gained more than a sibling. I had gained a part of me that had been lost for years. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about everything that had happened. A simple test I took out of curiosity had changed the story of my life. It had broken me, healed me, and reshaped me in ways I never imagined. Family, I realized, was not just about blood but about love, truth, and the courage to face both. My father who raised me would always be my father, no matter what the paper said. But now I also had another family, another chapter to write. The DNA didn't just reveal my past, it gave me a new future. And in that moment, I understood that sometimes the truth doesn't destroy you. Sometimes, it sets you free. Behind the locked door, the house at the end of the street was different from every other house in town. Its walls were covered in thick ivy that seemed to crawl higher every year, like green fingers gripping the bricks. The roof leaned as if it carried secrets too heavy to bear, and the windows stood unbroken, black and watchful like the eyes of something alive. People avoided walking near it, and children dared each other to run up the porch, but no one ever lasted more than a few seconds. Whispers floated around about screams that were once heard inside, and strange lights that flickered when no one lived there. But none of those stories compared to the one thing that frightened people most, the heavy wooden door at the center. Its chains were thick and rusted, and no one remembered a time it had been opened. The door seemed to breathe its own silence, warning strangers to stay away. And everyone did, everyone except Leela, the new girl who had just moved into town. Leela never feared the house the way others did. She had rented a small room above the bakery across the street, and every morning when she pulled her curtains, her eyes landed on the locked door. At first, she told herself she was only curious, but soon, curiosity turned into obsession. Her grandmother had once lived in this same town, and before she died, she gave Leela a strange warning. "Stay away from the locked door. Promise me." Her voice had been sharp, almost desperate, and Leela could still remember the way her grandmother's hand shook as she spoke. But Leela, being stubborn and restless, had never believed in old superstitions. Now, every time she saw the mansion, her grandmother's warning echoed louder in her head. It wasn't fear that pulled her closer, but a need to know what her grandmother had been so afraid of. The locked door wasn't just a mystery to her, it felt like it was meant for her to uncover. One night, everything changed. Leela was drifting into sleep when soft music touched her ears. At first, she thought it was a dream, but when she sat up, the notes were still there, slow, sad, and haunting, like a lullaby for a child. Her heart beat faster as she followed the sound to her window, and when she looked outside, she saw it. A faint golden light flickered behind the mansion's upstairs window, and she could almost swear she saw a shadow move across the curtain. Her hands turned cold, but excitement grew inside her chest. She whispered to herself, "It's not empty." The next morning, she asked the neighbors if anyone lived in the mansion, but they avoided her questions. An old woman muttered, "Some things are better left alone." A shopkeeper shook his head, saying, "Curiosity killed more than cats in this town." The more they refused, the more determined Leela became. If no one else wanted to find the truth, then she would. Days passed, and Leela spent hours sitting outside the bakery pretending to read while her eyes stayed fixed on the mansion. Sometimes, she thought she saw movement inside, a quick flicker of shadows vanishing behind curtains. Once, she heard a soft cry, so faint it could have been the wind, but her heart told her otherwise. Her nights grew restless, filled with strange dreams of a little girl standing behind the locked door, whispering, "Set me free." Leela woke up sweating each time, the echo of the child's voice lingering in her ears. She felt as though something, or someone, was trying to reach her. And then one evening, as the sun sank and the street grew quiet, she saw it, the locked door was open. The chains dangled loose, broken as if torn from the wood, and the heavy door stood slightly ajar. A line of darkness spilled out from the crack like a shadow crawling across the ground. Leela froze, her breath trapped in her throat, but her feet betrayed her. Slowly, step by step, she moved closer until she stood at the porch. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door, and it groaned like a beast waking after years of sleep. The air inside was heavy, filled with the scent of dust and something sweetly rotten. Yet the house was not empty. The furniture was arranged neatly, as though someone still lived there. Portraits hung on the walls, faces painted with eyes that seemed too alive, staring at her every move. Leela's skin prickled when she realized one of the portraits looked familiar. The woman in the frame bore the same sharp nose and deep eyes as her grandmother. She blinked, her chest tightening, and hurried deeper into the house. The silence pressed against her ears until she reached the hallway where the locked door stood. It was larger than she expected, its wood dark and polished, humming faintly under her touch as if alive. She placed her hand on the cold handle, and the moment her skin touched it, her vision blurred. Flashes filled her mind, a man shouting, a child crying, the sound of something breaking. Leela staggered back, gasping, her heart racing. The door wasn't just locked by chains, it was locked by something far older and far darker. She ran out that night, but she couldn't stay away. The visions followed her into her dreams, clearer with every passing hour. The little girl appeared again and again, whispering, "You are the only one who can free me." Leela searched the house the next day, desperate for answers, and when she removed one of the portraits from the wall, she found a key taped behind it. Her hands shook as she held it, the metal cold against her palm. Everything inside her screamed not to do it, but the whispers grew louder, almost painful. She returned to the door, slid the key into the lock, and twisted. The chains fell to the ground with a heavy clang. The door opened slowly, revealing a narrow staircase leading underground, where the air was colder than ice. Leela held her breath and stepped down, each creak of the wood beneath her feet echoing like thunder. The staircase led to a room that froze her blood. It was a nursery, untouched by time. Dust covered the toys, but the rocking chair in the corner moved gently as if someone had just risen from it. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, and when Leela looked into it, she didn't see her own reflection. Instead, she saw the little girl from her dreams staring back at her, her eyes wide and filled with tears. Leela stumbled back, but the girl's voice filled the room, soft and sorrowful. She told Leela the truth. Years ago, her father had locked her away, ashamed of a secret he never wanted the world to know. She had died in that room, and her spirit had never left. The portraits on the walls upstairs were her family, her bloodline, and Leela's grandmother was one of them. Leela's breath caught in her chest as the pieces fell together. She wasn't just a stranger. She was part of the mansion's story. The little girl's voice grew desperate, begging Leela to break the curse and set her free. But the moment Leela reached out, the walls began to shake, and shadows rose from the ground like smoke. They twisted and formed shapes, whispering angrily, pulling at her arms and legs as if trying to stop her. The locked door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. Panic clawed at her throat as she struggled against the shadows, her body trembling from the cold touch of their hands. The girl cried louder, her voice breaking with pain. "Please, don't leave me here." Leela realized she had only two choices: surrender to the darkness or fight to free the spirit, even if it cost her everything. Her grandmother's warning rang in her ears, but so did the cries of the child. With tears streaming down her face, she reached forward, her hands glowing faintly as if some hidden power inside her had finally awakened. The shadows screamed, the room roared, and the mirror shattered into pieces. A blinding light filled the nursery, and for the first time, silence followed. When Leela opened her eyes, the little girl was gone, her laughter echoing faintly as if carried away by the wind. The nursery was empty, the rocking chair still at last. Leela stumbled back up the staircase, gasping for air, and when she pushed the door open, the chains lay neatly on the floor, no longer rusted but shining silver. The mansion felt lighter, its silence no longer heavy but calm. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin, and turned back to the house. For the first time, the windows no longer looked like watchful eyes but peaceful ones. She whispered to herself, "It's over." Yet deep inside, she wondered if the story had truly ended, or if freeing the spirit had only awakened something else behind the locked door. The black car stopped at the red light. Inside, Marcus leaned back against leather seats, his gold watch catching the glow of the traffic lights. People on the street stared at him with envy. He had climbed out of the same broken streets years ago, but now he lived in a mansion on the hill. He thought the past was gone forever, buried under piles of money. What he didn't know was that the streets never forget. As the car moved forward, Marcus saw a group of boys at the corner, laughing, smoking, hustling like he once did. For a moment, he remembered his youth, dirty sneakers, empty stomach, running from cops. He shook his head and whispered, "Never again." But one face in that group stared too long. The boys' eyes followed the car, filled with something more than curiosity. They burned with recognition. Later that night, Marcus hosted a party in his mansion. Rich guests in silk dresses and tailored suits danced under crystal lights. Laughter echoed in the hall, but Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder. He didn't know why. When he stepped outside for air, a shadow moved near the gate. A voice rose from the darkness, "You remember me?" Marcus froze. It was the same boy from the street corner. The boy stepped closer, revealing scars across his cheek. "You left us," he said. "Back then, you took the money and ran. You left my brother bleeding on the sidewalk." Marcus's chest tightened. He had tried to erase that night, the robbery that went wrong, the partner he betrayed to save himself. He thought no one would ever know. But here it was, standing at his gate, alive in the form of the dead man's younger brother. Fear gripped Marcus, but pride pushed him to stand tall. "That was years ago. I built a new life. Take this." He pulled out a thick envelope from his pocket, filled with cash. "Forget the past." The boy's face twisted. "You think money buries blood. You think money silences the streets. My brother's name still echoes out there." He threw the envelope back. The bills scattered across the driveway like fallen leaves. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt like footsteps coming closer. Every whisper of wind felt like a voice calling his name. His wealth no longer felt like protection, it felt like a prison. For the first time in years, he felt small, like the boy who once begged for food under broken streetlights. The next morning, the city woke to shocking news. Marcus's mansion gates stood wide open, his car left running. Inside, he was found slumped on the marble floor, clutching his chest. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but those who knew whispered otherwise. They said the streets came to collect. At the funeral, men in suits cried politely, and women in black whispered about his empire. But outside the graveyard, that same boy stood silently, hands in his pockets. He didn't smile, he didn't cry. He just muttered under his breath, "What money can't bury, the streets will always remember." Pregnant for my brother, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the test strip in my hand. The two faint lines looked back at me like a secret I couldn't run away from. My chest tightened, and my hands shook. I wanted to cry, but no sound came out. For days I had been feeling sick, weak, and restless, but I never thought it would come to this. Now the truth was staring at me, and I didn't even know where to start. Every time I saw him around the house, my heart pounded faster. He walked past me like nothing was wrong, like there was no hidden weight pressing down on my chest. His laughter filled the rooms, and I wondered how he managed to stay so calm while I was falling apart. I wanted to hate him for it, but I couldn't. The bond between us was complicated, built on years of shared pain, loneliness, and secrets no one else would understand. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I replayed the moments in my head. It wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't planned. It was one of those nights when emotions took control, when comfort turned into something else. We never spoke about it afterward. We just carried on with life like nothing had happened. But my body refused to keep the secret anymore. The little life growing inside me was proof of everything we tried to bury. I thought about telling someone, maybe my best friend, maybe even my mother, but the words stuck in my throat. What would I say? How could I explain it? No one would understand. They would look at me with disgust, with shame, with judgment. So I stayed quiet, carrying the burden alone. At school, I forced smiles, answered questions, and pretended I was fine. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the fear growing bigger, just like the secret inside me. He must have noticed the change in me. Sometimes his eyes lingered too long, like he wanted to ask but didn't dare. Once, he almost said something, but stopped himself, biting down on his lip and walking away. That silence was worse than any words. I wanted him to take responsibility, to say we would figure it out together. But he kept living his life as if mine wasn't falling apart. And that hurt more than anything else. At night, I lay awake, whispering to the little life in my belly. I told it things I couldn't tell anyone else. That I was scared, that I didn't know if I was strong enough, that I didn't know what kind of world it was entering. I wondered if I would ever be able to love it without remembering the secret behind its existence. Tears soaked my pillow as I prayed for answers that never came. One evening, when the rain beat hard against the windows, I found the courage to speak. My voice shook, but I said it anyway, "I'm pregnant." His face froze, all color draining from it. He didn't speak right away, and the silence stretched like a knife cutting between us. Finally, he whispered, "Are you sure?" I nodded, holding back tears. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair, pacing the room like a trapped animal. For the first time, I saw the fear in him too. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken words. We avoided each other, yet the distance felt louder than ever. When our eyes met, there was guilt, shame, and something else neither of us could name. But then he reminded me of the truth we both often forgot: we were not blood. We were both adopted, raised in the same home but carrying different pasts. Somehow that made things even more confusing, because the walls we thought should separate us had never really been there. One evening, he took my hand and said we should tell our parents. My heart raced, but he stayed close, his arm firm around my shoulders as we sat him down. The words poured out between shaky breaths, and silence filled the room when the truth landed. Our parents were shocked, but they didn't turn away. They reminded us that adoption had made us family, but love and responsibility meant facing things together. From that night on, he stayed by my side, walking me to appointments, carrying my worries, and promising I wouldn't go through it alone. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe, because even in the middle of our mess, he chose to stand with me. My stepmother is my sister. I grew up believing my family story was simple. My father told me my mother died giving birth to me, and that was all I needed to know. He raised me with love, though there was always a quiet sadness in his eyes whenever her name came up. For years, I lived with him alone, and though I sometimes wondered about the mother I never knew, I never questioned his version of the story. When I was older, he remarried. That's when I met the woman I would come to call my stepmother. She was young, beautiful, and kind. She didn't treat me like a burden, and for that I was grateful. Over time, we grew close. She understood me in ways I couldn't explain, almost like she had known me long before she came into our house. We spent evenings talking, sharing stories, and sometimes laughing until tears rolled down our cheeks. I felt lucky. Many of my friends complained about their stepmothers, but mine was different. She made our house feel like a home again after years of silence. But life has a strange way of bringing hidden truths to light. One day, my grandparents on my mother's side came to visit after many years. I had not seen them since I was a child, and they carried with them an old box of photographs and letters. While flipping through those pictures, I noticed one that made my stomach twist. It was of my mother holding a little girl, a daughter I never knew existed. My grandparents told me that before marrying my father, my mother had left this daughter with them. She was raised apart, unaware of her mother's second life. My stepmother was not home when they visited. I couldn't sleep that night. The face of the girl in the photo looked too familiar. The shape of her smile, the way her eyes seemed to speak, they were the same as the woman who was now my stepmother. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it was coincidence, but deep down I knew. My stepmother, the woman I had grown to love and respect, was that little girl in the photograph. She was my mother's first child, which meant she wasn't just my stepmother, she was my sister. The truth was unbearable. Neither of us knew. She had no idea the woman who gave birth to her was the same woman who gave birth to me. My father didn't know either. He believed the past had been buried with my mother. And now here I was, holding a secret that could destroy everything. Every time I looked at her, my heart sank. She wasn't only part of my present, she was part of a past that none of us had fully understood. I don't know how to tell her. I don't know if I should. The bond we share is innocent, yet now tainted by blood we didn't know connected us. Sometimes I wish I had never opened that box, never seen those photographs. But I did, and now, every time I call her stepmom, a voice inside whispers the truth. She is my sister too. Early colleague. At the office, no one wanted to sit close to Jared. He was not only strange, but there was always a smell that seemed to follow him around. It wasn't the kind of smell you could name easily. It wasn't sweat, food, or garbage. It was different, like something heavy in the air that you couldn't escape. People whispered about him when he left the room, but no one dared to ask him directly. He walked with quiet confidence, as if he knew more than everyone else, and somehow that made the smell even more unsettling. The smell seemed to grow stronger at certain times. On rainy mornings, it filled the office like fog, making people cover their noses with their sleeves. Some joked about it secretly in the break room, but others were simply uneasy, as if the odor carried a story they didn't want to hear. Jared never reacted. He typed on his computer, drank his black coffee, and gave short nods when spoken to. His silence added weight to the mystery, because no one could tell if he even noticed the way others avoided him. One day, a new employee named Clara joined the team. Unlike the rest, she didn't avoid Jared. She sat close to him and spoke with him as if nothing was wrong. The others watched, surprised and confused. Strangely, the smell never seemed to bother her. When people asked her how she could stand it, she only shrugged and said she didn't notice anything strange. Her calmness made some of the older workers nervous. They wondered if maybe the smell wasn't real at all, or if Clara had some secret connection to Jared. The weeks passed, and odd things began to happen. Documents would go missing from desks, then appear later in places no one remembered leaving them. Lights flickered at night when Jared stayed behind after everyone else had gone home. The office cleaner reported hearing voices in the empty building, whispers too soft to understand. Everyone pointed their suspicions at Jared, though no one had proof. The smell, now stronger than ever, seemed to wrap around every strange event, making people believe it was more than just bad hygiene. One Friday evening, Clara stayed late to finish her work. She noticed Jared was still there, standing by the large window, staring out into the dark city. The smell was sharp, almost choking, but Clara didn't flinch. She walked up to him and softly asked, "Are you going to tell them?" Jared didn't turn to face her. He only shook his head slowly. Clara nodded, as if she already knew the answer. They stood there in silence, the smell filling the room like a heavy secret. The next morning, the office was buzzing with shock. Jared had not come to work, and his desk was completely empty. No files, no pens, not even his chair was left behind. It was as though he had never worked there at all, but the strangest part was that the smell didn't leave with him. It still lingered in the air, wrapping itself around the workers, making them uneasy. Some swore it was stronger than before, almost as if Jared had left something behind that they couldn't see. Clara was the only one who didn't seem surprised. She went about her tasks calmly, not answering the questions people whispered around her. When asked directly, she only smiled faintly and said, "He'll be back when it's time." The way she said it made everyone shiver. The smell remained, reminding him of the colleague who was gone but not forgotten. The office tried to return to normal, but it never did. Rumors spread quickly. Some said Jared was part of something dark, others said he was a messenger for something none of them could understand. Clara kept her silence, and that silence became heavier than words. The office was no longer just a workplace. It had turned into a place where secrets lived behind every desk. No one saw Jared again. The smell would return on those mornings, sharp and unbearable, forcing everyone to remember the man they never understood. The truth was never spoken aloud, but deep inside, each worker carried their own version of the story. He sat by the corner of the busy market, dusty shirt clinging to his thin frame, a sack of plastic bottles by his side. Traders called him the boy with golden luck, because no matter how tough the day was, he always left with more coins than the others. He never begged, only worked fast, sorting bottles, pushing carts, running errands with a quiet determination that made people trust him. What no one knew was that every evening, after the noise of the market died down, he walked 2 streets away and unlocked the rusty gate of a small compound that belonged to him. Inside the compound was a house too big for one person, lights rarely turned on, but paid for in full. His father had died suddenly and left it in his name, but the relatives pushed him out, saying a boy couldn't manage wealth. Instead of fighting them in court, he moved to the streets, waiting for the day he could grow enough to claim it openly. Until then, he carried his sack every day, blending in with the other street kids, hiding the truth that he wasn't just another boy chasing survival, he was the only street boy in town who already owned a home. She stood in the dim hallway, phone in hand, tears blurring the screen. The message read, "Don't dumb me," loudly crying. It wasn't to her, it was sent from her own number. Her heart pounded as she thought she deleted every contact except her mother and her ex. Who could send this? A creak behind her. She flipped the light switch, nothing. The hallway stretches longer than it should, shadows thicker. She's certain someone watched her, but no one's there. She drops her phone, it flashes, the message again, but this time the message preview shows a contact, Mom. She rushes into the living room. There's her mother, sitting quietly, knitting. Mom, she whispers. Her mother looks up, confused, then holds back a smile as she picks up the phone. Her handwriting glows on the lock screen. I miss you. The same message. It sends itself. She stares, shocked. Her mother says softly, I found the old app you installed. It sends messages to your number so you remember who you really are. My dad married my sister. When Dad introduced his new wife, I froze. She looked too familiar, like a memory I couldn't place. At first, I thought it was just her eyes. They were the same shade of brown as mine, the same tilt as Mom's. I tried to ignore it. Weeks passed, but something gnawed at me. One night, I found her staring at Mom's framed photograph in the living room. She didn't blink for a long time. Do you know her? I asked quietly. Her lips trembled. I think she might have been my mother. My chest tightened. Mom had given birth to a daughter before marrying Dad. She had kept it a secret, even from him. That daughter, abandoned young, grew up elsewhere. When we told him, he collapsed into his chair, face pale, hands shaking. No words came, only silence heavy enough to crush the walls. The marriage ended that very week, but the scars remain. I finally understood why she looked like me, why she stared at Mom's photo, why fate had dragged her back into this house. She wasn't just my stepmother, she was my sister. Family reunion. They gathered in the old house after 20 years, the same house where their father had died under unclear circumstances. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of chairs scraping the wooden floor. The siblings, Mary, Daniel, and Ruth, kept avoiding each other's eyes, each carrying questions buried for decades. Mary finally spoke, her voice shaking. We all know he didn't fall down those stairs by accident. Daniel clenched his fists, staring at the floor, while Ruth whispered, then say it, who pushed him? The air grew heavy, memories crashing in like waves, pulling them back to that night when their arguments with their father had ended in screams. Daniel stood, trembling, and admitted what they had all feared but never confirmed. He had pushed their father, not out of hate, but to stop him from hitting Ruth with the heavy cane he always carried. Their father slipped too far, and the fall killed him instantly. Tears rolled down Ruth's face as Mary finally understood why the truth was hidden. Daniel had protected them both but carried the guilt alone. For the first time, the mystery was answered, and silence turned into sobs, not of anger, but of relief. Their reunion ended not with laughter, but with a painful truth finally set free. Blinded by love. One Tuesday morning, the moment ended. Liam was gone. His side of the bed was cold, his clothes missing from the closet. No note, no call, just an empty space where he used to be. Panic clawed at Alara. She called his number, again and again, but it went straight to voicemail. Alara saw only him. Liam's smile was a sunrise, his laughter a melody. Her friends, her family, they tried to speak, their voices hushed with concern. He's too good to be true, her sister whispered. There's something about his eyes, her father mused. But Alara heard nothing. Their words were distant echoes, drowned out by the beating of her own heart. She was utterly, completely in love, and that love was a thick, beautiful fog. He never spoke of his past, not really. Vague stories, quick changes of subject. Alara didn't mind. Their present was enough, a vibrant, all-consuming world built for two. She didn't need to know where he went during the day, or why his phone was always on silent. Love, she believed, was about trust, about living in the moment. The police came. They asked questions she couldn't answer. Where did he work? Who were his friends? Did he have any enemies? Alara stared blankly. She knew nothing beyond the man who had charmed her, loved her, and then vanished. The fog began to lift, slowly, painfully. Weeks passed. The silence in the apartment grew heavy. Then, a small, unmarked package arrived. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried leaves, was a tarnished silver locket. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Liam's. My brother made me pregnant. The nights in our small house were always quiet, almost too quiet. I used to hear his footsteps outside my room, and I pretended to be asleep. He would sit at the edge of my bed sometimes, whispering things I couldn't understand. I never told anyone, not even when the silence became heavy, and his presence felt like a shadow I could not escape. Weeks turned into months, and my body began to change in ways I could not explain. I avoided mirrors, avoided questions, avoided eyes that stared too long. My mother asked if I was sick. My father grew suspicious when I ate little and slept too much. I kept my mouth shut, carrying a secret that weighed more than the child growing inside me. The house felt smaller with every passing day. He still looked at me across the table, his eyes burning with something no one else noticed. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed the words, afraid of breaking the only fragile piece left in our home. Nights were longer now, filled with tears no one heard. I knew the truth would come out, but I wasn't ready for it to shatter everything. And then it happened. My mother found out. Her voice cracked like glass when she asked me who was responsible. My father's hands trembled with rage. I finally spoke, my lips shaking, pointing to the one person who was supposed to protect me, my brother. The room froze. Silence swallowed us all. Then my mother whispered the truth that had been hidden for years. He is not your blood brother, we adopted him before you were born. My scary scar. One evening, I noticed something stranger. As I touched the scar, I felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat beneath it. The more I pressed, the stronger the sensation grew until I felt dizzy. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw flashes of light, like torches glowing in the dark woods. I stumbled back, my heart racing, wondering if my mind was playing tricks. I couldn't keep ignoring it anymore. The scar wasn't just an accident. It was hiding a truth my family didn't want me to know. Every morning when I looked in the mirror, the scar on my left arm stared back at me. It was long, twisted, and darker than my skin, as if it carried its own shadow. The strange part was that I had no memory of how I got it. My mother always avoided my questions, changing the subject whenever I asked. At night, I often woke up sweating from dreams of running through a dark forest, branches cutting across my arm, but when I woke up, my room was quiet and safe. Still, the scar seemed to burn whenever the dream ended. The next day, I confronted my mother. Her face turned pale, and tears filled her eyes. She finally told me the truth. When I was a child, I had wandered into the forest alone. People in the village believed the place was cursed. My mother found me hours later, unconscious, with the mark burning into my skin as if carved by fire. The doctors couldn't explain it, and no medicine could heal it. That scar, she whispered, is a sign that something from the forest chose you that night. You survived what others never did. Suddenly, the dreams, the burning, and the silence all made sense. My scar wasn't just a wound, it was proof that I had faced the curse and lived. My brother had always trusted me with everything, but one evening I noticed something strange in his wife's eyes when she looked at me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the way she lingered around me, asking unnecessary questions and laughing at things that weren't funny, made me uneasy. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, yet her presence began to feel heavier each time we were in the same room. My brother never suspected anything, and that made the situation even more dangerous. One night, while helping her carry groceries into the house, her hand brushed against mine and she didn't pull away. Instead, she stared at me with a look I couldn't explain, half daring, half desperate. My heart pounded because I knew what this could mean if anyone found out. I avoided her eyes, pretending nothing had happened, but deep inside I could feel her intentions growing clearer each day. It was like a secret only we shared, and the walls of the house seemed to close in on me. Days later, my brother left for a business trip, and she used the chance to visit my room. She sat on my bed, silent at first, then whispered words I never thought I would hear. I felt trapped, unable to breathe, my mind torn between loyalty and the dangerous pull of her confession. That night changed everything, because from that moment on, I knew the secret between us would either destroy my family, or reveal truths none of us were ready for.
Mark always smelled strange, like wet earth and smoke. Everyone whispered, but no one said anything. One night, I stayed late, and saw his shadow move on its own, twisting and stretching like it had a life of its own. I followed him to the supply closet, and saw him in a circle of glowing symbols, chanting in a strange language. His body blurred, fading in and out. The smell wasn't normal. It was magic. Mark wasn't just a man, he was a supernatural being hiding among us. The next morning, he sat at his desk, like nothing happened. But every time I passed by, I could smell the faint trace of smoke and earth. That smell was a warning. Some secrets are too strange to speak about.
The monster living in my room. I wake up every night, drenched in sweat, with my hands shaking as if I had just fought someone in my dreams. The mirror across my bed shows scratches on my face and arms, yet my door remains locked. Neighbors whisper about strange growls they hear from my apartment, but I laugh it off, pretending not to believe them. Still, deep down, I know something is terribly wrong. Fear grows when I notice missing pets in the neighborhood, and people begin asking questions I cannot answer. My best friend avoids me now, after seeing my glowing eyes one night when the power went out. And tonight, as the clock strikes, I finally see it clearly in the mirror. My own reflection has sharp fangs, because the monster has always been me. The smell of betrayal, the sharp scent of burnt almonds filled the air, pulling at Elias's memory. He stood in the wet alley, rain shining on the stones under the dim gaslight. The place was always dark, but tonight the shadows felt heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. The air carried the taste of blood, and the only sound was the steady drip of water. He knew no one was there, yet a chill told him he was being watched. Kneeling, his hand touched something cold and slick. A silver crest gleamed faintly, and the same almond smell he had used earlier stung his nose. The dead man's eyes stared at the sky, empty and cold. Elias knew then, the smell was the answer. It was the almond extract he himself had given, a gift to his wife's secret lover, just before the killing. She stood in front of the mirror, her face wet with tears, her mouth wide open in a silent scream. Around her reflection, shadowy demons with burning eyes reached out, whispering cruel words that cut deeper than any knife. They told her she was a failure, unwanted, and too late to fix her life. The mirror didn't just show her face, it showed her pain, her loneliness, and the heavy chains of society's expectations pressing on her chest. Her fists tightened as she stared back at the demons, refusing to look away. For a moment, she almost believed their lies, but then she saw her own eyes, still shining, still alive, still fighting. With every breath, she told herself she was not too late, not too broken, and not defined by what she lacked. The demons hissed louder, clawing at her reflection, but she whispered back to herself, I am enough, and the mirror began to shake, cracking the world they built around her. Maya's scream echoed through the tiny apartment, a sound as familiar as the chipped paint on the walls. Another rejection email, another day of scrolling through job boards, her thumb numb from the endless swiping. At 24, she felt ancient, a relic of a generation that promised success but delivered ramen dinners and a mountain of student debt. The weight of it all pressed down, a suffocating blanket woven from unpaid bills and the hollow ache of loneliness. She dragged herself to the kitchen, the scent of instant coffee a meager comfort. The morning sun, a mocking spotlight, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. Maya knew she needed to do something, anything, to break the cycle. Maybe volunteer at the local animal shelter, or finally start that online course she'd been putting off. The possibilities swelled, a chaotic mess in her weary mind, as she took a long, slow sip of her coffee, steeling herself for another day of the grind.